Hello, my name's Dr. David Riley, and I'll be teaching 1003 PSY this trimester. If you didn't know, it's research methods and statistics that we'll be studying, and we're going to give you as much information as we can to set you up for a good path in this course. So, that's a photo of me. You can find the full list of teaching team members this trimester, though, by visiting Learning of Griffith and looking under staff information. We have two campuses, so the Gold Coast campus and the Mount Gravatt. The teaching team will vary for your computing labs, but I'll be doing the lectures for both campuses. So I think probably a few of you are wondering, why should we be studying research methods and statistics in psychology? Many people go into psychology with the aim of doing counseling, and the idea of doing research methods and statistics sometimes brings up some degree of trepidation, or alternative, you go the other route and brings up some degree of boredom. So my job today will be trying to convince you why this is an important subject and also how it lays down a foundation for your later coursework. So the answer why we do actually study it is that psychology is both a science and a practice. What do I mean by that? Well, the science provides the theoretical knowledge upon which clinicians base their techniques. So we've learnt quite a lot about the human brain, but we've learned even more about the human mind. You generally don't go tinkering with the brain directly, but psychology has taught us that the things that we do, the experiences that we have, actually has an effect on brain development and on how the brain activates and processes things. So we've learnt techniques like cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, that actually it has some therapeutic benefit. But we needed the science behind it to learn those techniques and to actually build the techniques which we then use in psychological practice. So practice applies the scientific knowledge, and we use evidence-based therapies. And it also identifies important issues for research, things that we don't yet know, that we don't understand. So why does a treatment work with one type of client, but perhaps not with another? And so that feeds back, and we have this cyclical loop, so that the practice informs the science, and the science informs the practice. So an understanding of the research methods and the statistics that we use is just vital for studying psychology, but also for practicing psychology. Believe it or not, we don't know everything at this point, and there will be new techniques, new information that is discovered, that is published in the theoretical literature, and that you as a clinician will need to evaluate. So you need to have a firm foundation for all these skills. So research methods and statistics form the basis of knowledge and evidence in psychology. So what do we mean by research? Well, research is a systematic scientific process to collecting evidence. When we measure things in psychology, like your level of depression, to see if it's going up or down in response to treatment, we need things that are reliable, that are consistent, that will have the same measurement accuracy for me as it will for you or for a client or for another patient. And we also increasingly talk in psychology about reproducible effects, because it's very easy if you collect a small number of participants. You might sometimes find there's a significant effect, but it doesn't reproduce to the next lot of participants or to another group of people. And if it's evidence-based, then you want to have some accumulating evidence so that it's not just one study you're basing your treatment on. It's many studies that reproduce the same effect. So research is the approach to finding answers to questions like, does therapy work? Is depression one condition or is it many? Do extroverts perform better on certain tasks or in certain professions? So we use research to answer these questions. Now, here's the important part. The research is the process of collecting the data. The statistics are where we use numbers to summarize and find patterns in observations. And we want to be fairly confident. We want to have a fairly high degree of surety that the effect that we've found is real and not illusory. So, for example, if I compare boys and girls on a language test, is it something about that population that girls do better on language tasks? Or is it just that particular group of boys and that particular group of girls that, for one reason or another, the choice of which students we picked, that showed a small advantage? We want to know with a degree of confidence that that advantage is real, not in the sample that we've collected, but the underlying population, the group it was drawn from. And so we come up with things like probability values to tell us whether or not the observed difference between two groups is significant. Now, in psychology, just as other health professions, we insist on a fairly high threshold for evidence. We're ethically obligated to use evidence-based therapies and not just things that we read in a newspaper advertorial or that we heard on a current affair. The latest cure for ADHD. We use only evidence-based therapies. But in order to produce that evidence, we need research and statistics to demonstrate therapeutic benefits, rather than relying on, subjective anecdotes. I had a friend and they talked to their dog and suddenly they felt better. So we need actual hard evidence that tests a group of people to see if a therapy actually really works. So you might have heard of this guy, Stephen Colbert. He coined this word truthiness. When you feel it in your gut, you know it must be right. So often when we have beliefs or ideological values, we see things in a certain light. And even as psychologists, we can be subject to what they call confirmation bias. You see in the data the pattern that you want. Conveniently, it affirms your belief, but when we subject it to statistics, the evidence may not hold up. So why do we use statistics in psychology? Well, one of the reasons psychology exists is because people are different from one another. They're not all the same. I think differently to you, think differently to my friend, to my student, etc. So scientists can actually observe and measure variations. So we could observe, for example, variations in height, and we might confirm the hypothesis that males are generally, not always, but generally higher than or taller than women. But we have a problem. So we can't actually dissect personality. If we give you a autopsy, which obviously you want to be dead for first, we can't cut up your brain and make measurements from it. You know, this person was extroverted, that person was introverted. The human brain doesn't show those sorts of differences. We can't put depression, for example, under a microscope. So I don't know how depressed you are, and I can't give you a blood test to confirm that. Now, there are actually some ways to take physiological measurements. So, for example, you've heard of serotonin and how that can be depleted in depression. We can drain spinal fluid or brain fluid and measure that, but it's pretty unpleasant to go through. So we don't often do that. What we do instead is we can use scores on a test. So we get you to fill out a self-report talking about these depression symptoms, which ones apply to you, which ones don't, and then we use the scores on that test to infer what your level of depression is. So what this course is all about, you're going to learn to organize and report the numbers. So the observations, there were 125 males and there were 136 females. They had a mean age of 23.57. We're also going to get you to find patterns in the data and interpret them. So is there a relationship, for example, between the level of bullying that you receive as a school child and your level of depression or your level of self-esteem? So we use statistics like correlation, like t-tests, in order to test those sorts of hypotheses. Let's focus on the biggest picture. This course will give an important set of tools that will allow you to do some of the following. You'll be able to read and understand research findings. You'll be able to critically analyze those existing research findings because not all research is conducted to the same standard. Some offer greater degrees of evidence than others. And remember, you want things to be reproducible across many studies, across many types of samples. You'll learn a little bit, and you'll learn more in future courses about the design of research studies and how to conduct research. Now, part of this process will be the research experience task that we give you. And I'll talk more about that later, but it allows you to actually see how, surveys work, how things are measured, how an experiment is done, and get some practical hands-on experience. You'll learn to determine whether a treatment plan or intervention technique is safe and effective. So remember, we like these evidence-based approaches. You'll have tools that are important, not just in your career, but in your life. So as you go through life and you hear these news broadcasts of this wonderful cure for autism or ADHD, just take out red food coloring from your diet, you'll actually be able to critically analyze claims like that. So let's get to the course structure. Now, this is a very intensive mixed mode approach. We have 6 modules in 6 weeks. A traditional psychology course is 12 weeks. So that means you have twice the content to cover, but the good news is you'll get it done in half the time. So we have 6 modules that we'll be going through, a different module for each week. And it's very important that you keep up to date with the the online mini lectures, that you do the readings for it, that you come to the computing labs, just so you don't fall behind. But we'll give you lots of support and scaffolding along the way. So this course is designed in a blended delivery mode. It's what we call a flipped classroom. And by a flipped classroom, what we mean is that instead of me just lecturing to you and you sitting there for 2 hours writing out notes, feeling very bored and frustrated, why is this lecture so long? What we're going to do is we're going to have activities. So I will actually ask you questions and I will get you to do tasks. And by doing a flipped classroom, that means I'm giving content to you and then you're giving answers back to me. And we find this leads to a more effective learning strategy. You've heard the saying that people have an average attention span of 15 minutes. Not quite true. We have a lot of variation, actually. But if you're just sitting there passively listening and you're not taking notes and you're not generating answers to questions, then you're not really learning as well. So this flipped classroom method works really well for a course like 1003 PSY because there's lots of questions I can be asking you. And the act of answering the question, that lays down a stronger memory trace than if you just read it or just heard it. So we're going to have these online mini lectures. You'll need to complete them before the actual main lecture. And the reason we have these online mini lectures is that everybody in psychology learns at a different pace. Some people learn quickly, some people take a little more time. And so we've devised these online mini lectures that are bite-sized pieces of information. We're talking 5, 6, 7 minutes. The beauty of that is that you can stop and go do something else and then come back to it when you're fresh in your mind. You can rewind the lecture, the mini lecture, and watch it again. There's something that you didn't understand. And so we've used these for a number of years now. We find it's very effective. And it just gives the opportunity for you as students to learn at your own pace, rather than at the arbitrary pace of the average student, because some people learn more quickly and some people take a little more time. Instead of your traditional lecture, we'll have these active learning lectures, and this is the main lecture that you'll be enrolled in. And normally we would do these face-to-face, but obviously with COVID, these will be done online. You'll log in at the appointed time on Mondays for Gold Coast students, Tuesdays for Mount Gravatt. And it won't just be me lecturing and talking and delivering a monologue for 2 hours. What'll happen is that I'll have questions or I'll have group tasks, and then we'll break into smaller groups online where you can talk with groups of 10 or 20 students, and you can work on a problem together. Now, ideally, that would be done face-to-face, but we'll be using what we call breakout groups and collaborate. So as long as you all participate and you're able to, use the microphone, then you can actually talk to your fellow students during these tasks. We'll see how that goes. But I'll also be having active learning content where I'll just ask you a rhetorical question and I'll give you a couple of minutes to think about it. Then we'll go through some of the answers. And another part of an active learning lecture is you can ask me questions. So it's really good when a student doesn't quite understand something, if they ask a question, then that way it clarifies the matter for them. But I guarantee you there'll be 10 or 20 other students with the same question that are just a bit too bashful to speak up. So it's really good if we could have a little bit of interactivity there. We'll also be having computer labs. Now, these will be done face to face, and these are absolutely essential that you turn up to. This is where you'll get really intensive support in actually learning the statistical package we use, SPSS, and actually doing the statistical techniques and interpreting. It'll also help when you're doing your written report because a lot of that content will be covered then. Now, we will have a very limited number of places for an online version of the computing labs, but past experience shows that online learning in a computing lab, particularly for statistics, it never has the same learning outcomes as face-to-face. So I'd encourage you all, if you're able to actually come to the computing labs face-to-face. We will have a very limited number of places for the online tutorial, but we want to try to reserve those for those students with a health complication that are vulnerable students, so they don't want to even entertain the risk of coming in, or that are caretakers for someone else who is vulnerable. So those online tutorials will open up, places will open up sometime during O Week. All right, we'll also be supported by these past sessions. So you're encouraged to enroll and attend a past session. So these are sessions run by more experienced students who are in their second, third year of study. They survived 1003 PSY. They know a few tricks, and this will be like a group study session, which gives you extra opportunities to practice your learning. It gives you extra opportunities to mix with other students and to ask questions and to get support. Now, these past sessions will be run online, so there'll be lots of sessions, so there's no excuse for not going. The reason why we call them pass is we find that students who attend them generally do pass. In fact, they actually generally do a little bit better than that. So I'd highly encourage you to make use of those. You can see more information about the past sessions on Learning at Griffith under pass. So the online mini lectures, there'll be just short mini lecture videos that cover the core content of the course. The reason that we have them as well is that means the time spent in class can be spent consolidating and expanding on these key concepts. But that assumes one thing, that you've actually listened to the mini lectures. And it's very tempting to put it off, come back to it later, but it's vital that you listen to them in in the preceding week or over the weekend, so that when you hit the active learning lecture on the Monday or the Tuesday, you can actually participate and engage with the content. So how to use the online mini lectures? You go to Learning at Griffith under Course Content, and you can see here we've got a mini lecture here telling you why you need to study statistics. And the video content will be on Learning at Griffith. You just click on the little play button and it'll play. But you'll also see underneath this a mini lecture transcript. And that gives you both the slides that cover the material as well as the transcript. So if you do have trouble with, for example, with a hearing impairment, we do cater with you by actually giving you the transcript. And what a lot of students find is that reading the transcript while they're listening to the video is often helpful. So you might find that a good strategy. All right, so we've covered the mini lectures. Let's get on to the active learning lectures. So these are hands-on activities to help consolidate and expand on the information you've learned in the videos. Thus, it's very important that you watch the online mini lectures before coming to the active learning lectures, as we'll be assuming that you've watched the lectures. Okay, so I don't want to belabor that point, but it really is important. You'll understand and get so much more out of it if you've done the readings and you've done the online mini lectures. So did someone say active learning in a lecture? Traditional lecture formats are very passive learning, where you just sit and you just listen and absorb the information. These lectures will be active learning in style. So we'll actually begin to apply the content from the mini lectures to real world problems. And we'll give you some exercises and some data to have a look at and actually practice these techniques. It will be fun, maybe not as fun as a Netflix binge session, but it will be more fun than the traditional lecture format because it's a collaborative session involving problem solving. It's more stimulating. You're actually doing things and you're learning in the process. But it will involve a bit of thinking about research methods and statistics. The more you can think about it, the more you can process the material. It will involve working in small groups, so we'll occasionally have these collaborate breakout sessions where we divide you into a small group and you problem solve with them. I will move between the groups and we'll get you to work on tasks. Other tasks, we might just get you to work individually. And you'll be able to ask questions to clarify your understanding. And you really should ask questions. I'm not one of those lecturers who get annoyed by questions. I actually really like it because it makes for a more interactive experience. And then by giving you the answers, then I go away feeling, yeah, that student's really got it now. They understand that. So it's rewarding for me. It's rewarding for you. All materials, though, will be posted following the lecture for revision. Now, recordings of the lecture will be made available, but I should stress it won't be able to record the small group sessions. And it won't be able to capture the practical aspects of doing the tasks. So online attendance is essential to getting the most out of it. Alternatively, you can pause and go and do the task yourself if you're reviewing it, rather than being tempted to skip ahead and just get the answer. Because the act of doing the work is actually part of the learning. Okay, then we brings us to our computer labs. So that's the practical application of the content covered in the online mini lectures. And it'll be an introduction to data analysis in SPSS. SPSS, if you haven't encountered it before, is a statistics package, a little bit like a spreadsheet, like Excel, but far more advanced and sophisticated. It has some really cool features. It stands for Software Packages for Social Sciences. That was its original name. It just became known as SPSS, and is one of the most widely used software packages for psychology. There are other software packages like R and Starter, but we've found that it's generally easier to teach students in SPSS. It requires a bit of a learning curve. Once you master it, you will feel so confident, but initially it can be a bit daunting. So come along to the computing labs and we'll give you hands-on skills that are essential to your learning. The design is face-to-face workshops. And as mentioned, there will be a small number of places for an online lab, but we don't want to overload that lab either with the number of students. And we find students really get more out of face-to-face. It also helps the tutor, because if you do an online dialing in, we can't see what you're doing on your computer in SPSS. You can only see what the tutor's computer is showing. So it makes it easier to ask questions and then to correct you and get you onto the right path. So let's go through the assessment plan now. There'll be a mid-trimester exam, and that's worth 20% of your final grade. It's held in the end of week 3. There'll be an assignment. That's a written report. It's worth 30% of the final grade. That'll be the end of week 6, and you submit it via Turnitin. So you've got plenty of time for the mid-trimester. You've got 3 weeks to learn the knowledge. It'll be held at the end of the week. The assignment will be the end of week 6, and we'll be supporting you in the computing labs to do this. But it's important you don't leave it to the very last minute. Otherwise, it's just going to be too overwhelming. So work on a little bit each week. Now, the final exam is worth 40% of your final grade. It'll be held in week 8, which sounds like, oh, it's just after the assignment, but we actually have a Christmas break in the middle. So that'll be January 4th for Mount Gravatt and January 5th for the Gold Coast campus. And the mid-trimester and the final exam will be done online. So for COVID, we can't have a huge group of 150 students in the one room, but it'll be online learning. Online testing. Now, we also have this component, research experience, which is worth 5% of the final grade. Now, I told you before that we're going to give you some practical experience, so you'll actually participate in psychological experiments or online studies. Most of it will be online sort of survey type tasks, and these will be run by researchers in psychology. And I'd encourage you as you're doing them to reflect about how they're doing the measurements. What constructs are they measuring? What do you think the aims of the experiment are, etc.? But we understand that not everyone will enjoy this or feel comfortable participating in surveys. So we also offer an alternative assessment activity. Now, full details are available on Learning at Griffith under the Assessment tab. Now, while it's only worth 5% in the grade, you're probably thinking, oh, that's not very much. I'm tempted to just blow that off. I can afford to skip 5%. Here's the sticking point. In order to complete the course and to pass the course, you have to have full completion in the research experience task. So we've used this for a number of trimesters now to encourage students to actually engage in either doing the research experience or the alternative assessment task, which is to read psychological journal articles and then critique them. Doesn't matter which one you use. I have no preference whatsoever, but by the end of it, you will have learned a little bit about how research is done in psychology. So it's a mandatory requirement. If you have a look at the course course profile, it's described all in depth there, but full completion is mandatory. So we're expecting everyone's going to get this 5% of the grade. It's very easy work. So you just fill out some surveys. There'll be a research participation system that you'll get you to log in, and you should receive a login either at the end of O week or the beginning of T3. So in the first week, you should receive a login. You can then log in, see the list of available studies and participate, and it will keep track of how many hours of research experience, each hour being 1%. So it's about 5 hours work, nicely, easily achievable, but I would encourage you to do it early rather than leaving it till the last minute. And if you don't like the studies that are on there, you've always got the alternate assessment task, and you can mix and match between the two. So it is mandatory. Listen to the orange orangutan who's popped up in your bottom right corner. Make sure that you do your research experience. It would be heartbreaking to do really well on the mid-trimester, the final exam, and the assignment, but to forget about this research experience. Okay, so the recommended textbook is Statistics by Witt and Witt. You can either use the 10th edition. There'll be lots of second-hand copies floating around. And that might be a good way to save money by picking up a second-hand copy. Students generally tend to ditch their textbooks because they're a bit expensive. Or you can use the 11th edition, which is actually available as an ebook as well. Now, there are a limited number of copies. I think it's 3 or 4 concurrent users in the library for this one. But I would encourage you to actually log in. There's an option to download a particular chapter, download and then log out so that it frees up one of those user slots for another student. Now, particularly leading up to the exam, it's going to be rather booked out. So I would be downloading my chapters in advance so that you have a copy on your laptop or your tablet or whatever device you're reading it on. There also are physical copies of both of these books in the library, but they tend to be quite popular. All right. So keys to success in this course. Make use of all of the materials on learning at Griffith. And I know I'm going to sound like a broken record here. Watch all of the mini lecture material before the class each week. It's not going to make as much sense if you watch it after. Now, try to keep up and don't let yourself get behind. With these compressed courses, it's very easy to become overwhelmed and it all just becomes too hard. I kind of like my students. I like teaching them, and I don't like to see them crying in my office and in tears. So if you're having problems, come to the face-to-face classes or the online consultation and ask for help. You also need to keep up with the content and listen to the lectures and do the readings. Do it each week, because if you put it off a week, remember you've got 2 computing labs and 1 lecture each week. That's a lot of material to cover. If you miss a week, you're always going to be a week behind and it just becomes too stressful. So engage in the material, attend, participate in active learning lectures, come to face computing laboratories, and ask questions. We're here to help, and we actually want our students to do well and not be stressed. And we like those light bulb moments. There's nothing more rewarding when you see that light bulb go off in a student's head and they finally get it. So ask questions, do the exercises, work together. It will really make a difference to your learning. You might want to consider studying in groups as well, maybe forming a study group and working together. That's something to consider. In PASS, go to the study sessions. They're run by experienced students who, in higher levels, they survived this course and they did well. So they might just have a few tips and tricks to help you out. Also engage with your tutor in class. Ask questions. Go to their online consults, and then you can ask more questions. You can ask your lecturer in the active learning lectures, in my consult, or via email. Now, if it's a tricky SPSS question that I can try to do screenshots, but it might be better face to face or actually asking in the computing lab. But if you can send a screenshot of what you're seeing in SPSS, then I can usually work out what's going wrong and guide you through it. So if you are going to use an email, try to include a screenshot of what's happening so I can see what the error message is or what's going on. And I can then send screenshots back to you. So that's one way that we can actually accomplish this via email. But generally, it's much easier to just ask the question face to face. And in Consult, I can actually share my computer screen so I can show you the SPSS and we can work through it step by step. So the teaching team's promise to you: we'll do everything we can to help you succeed. We'll reply to emails within 48 hours. That's our general turnaround. So 2 business days generally, but not on weekends. So we're human. We have families. It's not an expectation that Griffith staff will be working over the weekend unpaid to answer emails, but we will reply to your emails promptly. We will be available for consults. Come to online consult sessions with any of the teaching team. Doesn't matter. Whenever ones are available, whatever suits for you, and you can ask questions. Now, it will get hard, but it won't be too hard. The only time it becomes too hard is when you leave it all to the last minute. And then you really do struggle. And that always breaks my heart as a lecturer to see. So please don't leave it to the last minute. Now, attending PASS will help you pass. And I promise won't happen all the time, but it will happen sometimes. We'll have fun along the way. I'll try to lighten the active learning lectures a bit with jokes and funny animal videos, because we know that one of my areas is educational psychology, and we know that this actually reduces stress and anxiety in a statistics class. So your role in active learning, well, to engage with the course, to attend all the active learning lectures and the computing labs. It just won't be the same interactive experience otherwise. Come prepared, having watched mini lectures for that week. Ask questions. We love questions, and particularly in the tutorials. So I'll actually be doing some of the computing labs. And I'd much rather be answering questions than sitting up on the front desk, just watching the clock, bored, because I've got nothing to do. If you've got questions, I like answering. So please, I'd encourage you to actually ask and get assistance. Keep up with the content. Intensive courses like this move very quickly, but it is achievable. We run these T3 courses, for the last 3-4 years, and we find it's a really, really good way to get people through the content. You get through it twice as fast, so that's a nice thing as well. But it means that you've actually got to put the effort in as well. But if you put the effort, you turn up to the classes, you read the textbook, you do the online mini lectures, you do the assignment work, you will succeed. A lot of the key to success is self-beliefs. So if you're doubting yourself, you don't feel confident, you tend to avoid doing tasks that, like reading the textbook, like listening to the online lectures. But if you bring to a belief and a confidence that you succeed, well, as long as you do the work, you will. So a lot of it is self-belief. And I know, having taught statistics for so many years now, about 10 years off and on, that some students really struggle with the idea of math. And I think, I don't know math, I can't remember math. But I'll let you in on a little secret. There's these things called calculators, and they actually do all the math for you. As long as you know how to put the numbers in, that'll do the heavy lifting for you. And you will have access to a calculator in your exams. So please do bring along one with you. The amount of math involved is relatively straightforward. It's addition and subtraction. It's division and multiplication. And there might be a square root at some point, but that's just one button that you press on a calculator. So it's actually not a math-intensive course. I struggled with mathematics at high school. I only just got passes. Yet when I came to do psychology statistics, and I'd heard, it's all about the math, I found it incredibly straightforward, because by then I had a calculator and I didn't need to do hand calculations and solve quadratic equations. You can break it down into small chunks and actually do them with a calculator. So the math content is fairly light and fairly straightforward. Keep your belief up. You've got to believe you succeed. And if you do the work and put the effort in, you will. So learning statistics, we use this analogy. It's kind of like learning to drive. So there's a driver there. He's on his L plates. And he's driving along a road. By the blur there, he's probably driving way too fast for an L plate. And he sees a sign. Now, it's a bit confusing at first if you've never seen it. There's all these symbols and codes that we see on these signs. That means you've got a roundabout coming up. And the more times you're exposed to it, though, the more natural it becomes. It becomes second nature. It's instinctive. See a sign like that the first time, if you've never been into Australia and country roads, what on earth is that? But that's a kangaroo. So once you learn the symbols, the job of driving is so much easier. And in statistics, we have our own symbols. So we can see there, the symbol there, sigma. That means to take the sum of whatever is following that symbol. For example, to add up the scores of all participants in a group and then divide them by the number of people in a group, well, that's how you calculate the average. So you'll see these symbols, and once you get exposed to them, you'll see that and think, oh, of course, that's sigma. This one here is mu, not to be confused with moo. Mu represents the average of a group. It's the average, though, of a particular sample. So you learn these symbols as we go along in the mini lectures and also in the active learning lectures, and some of them will be covered in the textbook as well. So as long as you you're exposed to this material, you're engaging with it, eventually it'll become second nature to you. And then instead of being the learner, you'll be the girl tearing up the L plate. Okay? Progressing on to the next stage of your psychology career. Another reason we use this analogy, particularly with active learning, is you are in the driver's seat. You can learn at your own pace, which is one of the beauties of doing a course like this with the online mini lecture. You can decide, I'm just going to do one in the morning, one in the afternoon. And if you do that for 3 days, you've done the week's material. But you're the only person who can learn to drive the car. You actually have to do some of the practice. Now, you can master this. Everyone progresses from their L plate to their P plate to an open license. Might take some a little longer. They might have to put in a little more effort, but they do get there in the end. You have all the tools you need to succeed, and you will, I promise, learn statistics just like you learn to drive. You will be tearing up that statistics L plate, hopefully by the end of the course. Now, if you have questions, I would encourage you to check the frequently asked questions page first. Still working on these, but they'll be up on Learning at Griffith shortly. So if you email us with questions already answered here, the teaching team may refer you to the page. So save yourself and some time and check here first. But if it's not there, send us a question. We'll get back to you. And if it's an important one, we'll add it to the list of FAQs. So I really encourage you to make use of that. So what next? Well, it's orientation week, at the moment. You've got some tasks that you need to do before the week 1 classes. Now, for the Mount Vat students, they start on a Tuesday. For the Gold Coast students, they start on a Monday. So before that lecture, you need to have listened to these mini lectures, and we'll go through them. So why study research methods and statistics? It's only going to take you 7 minutes. Pretty cruisy. Statistics and psychology, 5 minutes. We're going to show you a graph called a histogram. It's a frequency distribution. Takes about 6 minutes. So you might want to listen to the first 2. And you might think, that's enough for me. I need to go for a walk, play with the dog, feed the kids. And then I'm going to tackle histogram in the afternoon. We'll learn about using numbers to describe distributions. So measures of central tendency like the mean, which you've probably heard of, the mode you might not have, and the median, which you might not have heard of. And then you follow on that, we'll use numbers to describe distributions, and spend about 15 minutes on that. So have a listen to the online lectures. They're up on Learning at Griffith now, and we'll see you in week 1 for the first online active learning lecture.